So Alessandra and I today will take you along with us on a journey that we carried out in the last 3 years. One last year obviously was a very special year for all of us, very difficult in a way, but for us it was very important because it gave us a chance to experiment um, and to create something for a special occasion. Maybe some of you will know the European Capital of Culture project. It is a European project where Europe says, okay, today, this year, the European capital will be a certain city. There is a sort of challenge among cities, and one city wins. So last year, the city of Matera was a winner, and the reason behind the gain was that the involvement of the citizens in the planning. So when we were commissioned this project as artists, we have imagined a very broad project that involved all the citizens. Therefore, we decided to put this dream into practice and to create an opera with the city, with the citizens. In order to do this, I prepared a presentation that shows our region, Basilicata. Our region does not have any theaters, and therefore what we did was to create a heritage, to take the heritage of people and of citizens, and convert that into a theater. You will see that the city is beautiful and it's very ancient. And I will tell you something about the history of our city because that's very connected to the story of our opera. It is one of the oldest inhabited cities in the world since Paleolithic times. It's always been lived in up to the 50s, 1950s. This is a picture taken by Cartier-Bresson. You can see that a few years ago, this city was quite abandoned, quite far away, cut off from the rest of the world, but very special still. It's completely carved into rock, and you can see that there are real caves, huge caves, very deep caves carved in the rock, in the stone. And you can see there is a special system of living together, called something of like neighborhood system. You can see here there's 6, 7 families. They are all living together and they are sharing everything. Obviously, it's not an online sharing sort of thing that is today fashionable. Obviously, it's a situation of poverty, but it is a different kind of sharing. It is a public space where people live together, eat together, and grow up together. You can see there's a lot of children in the streets just growing up together in this city where there were no cars and there was nothing but what you can see. This dimension of this situation of living together. This picture you can see was very inspirational for our opera Silent City. You can see one of the kids is wearing a scarf, and you will see this back in the opera. These kids are wearing shoes, and this means they were quite wealthy. And you can see the trousers are already quite long, so this means they were quite wealthy. But they're still living in quite some poverty. These are more children from the city of Matera. Why am I telling you about this? Because when we thought about the opera, realization of the opera, we were thinking about kids from 1950s and kids from 2019. You can see some kids who are part of our community and they worked with us because in Matera in the 1950s, something happened. In the 1950s, the regional government said that people are living in shameful conditions. And people are therefore taken away from the old city of Matera and moved to the modern part of the city. This was a sort of trauma that made the city into a silent city. The city was abandoned for almost 40 years, up to the year when UNESCO said, but this is a wonderful place, it's an incredible place. This is a place that makes the history of humanity. And at that time, uh, the city was rediscovered. The people from Matera have a very conflictual relationship with the rocks of the old city. It's a city where the conditions of the lifestyle was quite difficult, but children have a very different memory of that. When they were 8 years old, that those rocks were magical. They were like a magical labyrinth where to get lost. So we took these memories, the memories of these kids and of today's kids, and we imagined a new city. This is where our opera started from. I apologize with the Italian side. We have slides that are already in English, but I will translate them. So Silent City was the co-creation of a contemporary opera with the involvement of the communities. You can see here a moment, a snapshot of the 2 years of work on this opera. And we played the music back to the community. And this was a big celebration. And we can see this father and son, another generation that we managed to involve. These are our actors. As you can see, they're focusing and they're very taken by their role. And we took the three groups, three age groups, three communities: youth, the elder, and a choir, a university choir. You can see they're not young students, they are actually retired pensioners, but we took them, we asked them to be involved in all the phases of our work. So all our actors, including libretto, word, text, costume design, scenes, everything was discussed with them. These are the family groups that we involved: kids, elderly, chorus, young artists. It was very important for us to work with young opera artists, young musicians. We have had an orchestra that was made of musicians who were under 35 years of age. Um, uh, People who do not often get a chance in the region to make such important, relevant work. We involve the artists from the community, and we try to shift the perception of the artist. They became a facilitator in the community, and we try to work in a European dimension. That was another important value for us. These people did not speak English, but we had to do all the work with English-speaking participants. This was an incredible experience for them as well as for the kids. This was an important mental shift for them, the fact that it was an international collaboration. This is another important point that I'm going to tell you about. The 2/3 of the budget were spent on the process and not on the production. So we decided to spend our money on the process and not on the final show. It's better said in English than in Italian. So to give the ownership to people of this whole process was very important for us at a time when there were a number of events. There were hundreds of projects going on in the city at the same time. But this was a very long and thorough process that gave the project back to the community. these were our focuses when we tried to never to lower the level of our artistic ambition and vision. We tried to change the way of working and the management um, to make sure that the things went the way we wanted, so that we wouldn't betray the process that we had set up. And we tried to work on scalability. So we tried to think the entire time, how can we then do this again in another place? Can we apply this in another situation? And so I will tell you later about how we try to create a method from what we did. I'm telling you about this because we can send more information separately, and we invested some of the funds to evaluate the impact of what we did. We collected a huge amount of data during this process, and we gave ourselves three goals, three main objectives. The first one was to understand the artistic language of opera, so to make sure people understood opera, which can be quite a tricky subject for people, especially where there is no theater, to foster collaboration and cultural participation, and to validate the role of the artist into local communities. Uh, so trying to understand why is it important to have an artist in a community? It is not an easy question, and it was important for us to try and demonstrate that. These are the steps of the production, and I hope makes it a little bit clearer. The first step was the creation of the dramaturgy and libretto. Andrea, who is with us today, has led these workshops with a lot of people. Then we had the moment of collective creation of composition with Nigel Osborne, who worked with us. Then we went in depth with the collaboration of the Music Conservatory, and we had a group that studied electronic music, and we worked on arias and resonant landscapes. And then we started to open up to the public, and we tried to have people listen to some of the arias. It was important during these 2 years to have already a first moment of feedback. Then we casted the artists, and also the casting was open so that we could involve people and to allow the artists to meet up with the communities. Then we had workshops to the creation of scenes and costumes, and then open rehearsals to allow people to see the rehearsals. We had a premiere, and then we started working on our report of social impact assessment. Here I'm going to give you a few numbers. We had 280 people involved in the project, and this is a huge number for our territory. We had artists, theater school students, university students, teachers from primary schools, kids from the primary schools, under 30-year-old musicians. And this slide is very important for us. Makes us think about cultural welfare. So about how this sort of project can involve people who are very different, who need normally very different approaches. For example, elderly people, young kids, they all need very different approaches, different care. But this kind of very complex project manages to get everyone together and to create a common space. For us, the community opera is a space where people can get together, and this is the first and foremost thing. So when we create this space, we are happy. These are some of our kids, always looking very inspired. And this is a framework that we try to follow throughout our work in the community. So starting from learning and legacy. So everything needs to work together in a circle, and trying to put all these elements together throughout the project. This is Alessandra, who is writing a story with a little kid. This is a long text, and I'm not going to ask to our interpreters to translate this, but this shows what did the communities actually write to show and practice what does that mean that you wrote the story together with the communities. This is a text that was put together piece by piece from individual stories that were given, contributed by different people in the communities. I will read the last few lines. So the question was, what is your silent place? And I'm going to start from here. What is a silent place? You can imagine that each of these sentences were written by a young person rather than an elderly or other person. Silence is a place where we can speak out loud. It's a moment after lunch. It's a city where we can speak with the whole sky. Silence is the night. The night is a bed where we can lay down instead of those who are no longer with us. It's a house on a tree. It's our lounge in our house. It stones in the evening because here everything is big and there is no noise. It's a river when there is no one inside the river. It's a red backpack on our sofa. When they will sleep, when they will draw, when they will write. It's a silent night, a dark night, what the everything started from. I still get very emotional when I read this text 2 years later. This text was collated from all this little bit that you can see Andrea worked on. We asked the collaborators to describe the places of their life in 5 sentences and trying to put together this to create the city. You can see that young and old people have a very different way to approach the paper itself and to write. From this story, our story was born. And I will ask Alessandra, who's much better at telling stories than me, to tell us the story of Silent City. Thanks, Alessandra. Alessandra is saying, I will tell you, I wanted to tell you that some of the older people were not able to write, but thanks to this storytelling, were able to contribute to this creation of a story. Silent City, as the title itself says, is the story of a quiet, a silent place. And as we involve groups of people who were kids 50 years ago and who are elderly today, they contributed with their own dimension, their own vision of the past. They were the testimonies of the old past. They were the keepers of the past. And they were talking to young kids who have never lived this past. So we were creating like a long storyline that went towards the future. It looked like past and future could never meet. The future keeps running ahead, but we managed to get them to meet. We had a group of kids who knows the city of stones, the old city of Matera, which is nowadays a tourist destination. It's full of bed and breakfasts and restaurants. Therefore, we have two different words, two parallel words, two different dimensions and temporal dimensions. So we have the underground city, the city of stone, the old city, the city of the past, the dark city as well, because no one was living there and it was silent. Whilst we have the city above, the city of the present, the city of light, a city that was lived in by these kids who live in the present, the three characters of the opera. They were inspired by three actual kids. These kids decide one day to flag school, to abandon, to leave their teachers and their schoolmates behind, whilst they're learning outside, and they decide to go against the rules. Um, so we're also trying to uh, think about what is forbidden, because sometimes when you forbid something to a child, that encourages them to go against it. So we imagine this dark and dangerous city. The kids decide to go inside the city and to explore it because they have a will to explore. Kids always have a will to explore and to know more. This is a dimension that is connected to nature, to rock, to um, the elements of the city. Rock and stone are an element, are, were the place where people used to live, and water was the living element of this place. And these elements came up during our workshops. And the kids were imagining the old city as a place where people could be free, where kids could be free and explore. And it is a place of a happy childhood, but also a dangerous place. Because in order to access this place, this underground city, kids needed to go across strong currents and cisterns, and they risked to drown. This is a real story that came from the elderly group, telling us about young children who died in these wells and in these strong currents in the city. In the story, there is this young kid who saves our protagonists, who wears this scarf that we saw at the beginning in the photograph. Um, and it's a little child who is prepared to go to school by his mom. His mother tells him, sings him a song, puts the scarf on him, and says goodbye. Then there is a big shift, temporal shift, and we see we go to the present. Uh, and these kids, and we see the kids starting to explore the dark city. In the kid with the scarf is a silent kid. He doesn't speak. He's quiet as the city that he lives in, but he decides to act as a guide, like a Virgil in Dante's Inferno. He leads them to explore the memories of this place. The memories of this place are entrusted to the community. Therefore, the community is represented by a choir. The choir was made up of members of the community, in fact, of the students of the University of Potenza, and a choir of the children of the schools of Matera. The stories sung by these choirs are the stories of these old communities. There was another character as well, a sort of threat, an underlying threat. Like in all good stories, we always have a ghost, a bad fellow, a monster, a huge monster that scares us. And this um, the silent child is very scared of this threat. The threat is represented by the builders. Why is this such a threat? Because old people told us that when they were little in the 1950s, as the city above was being built, they could hear the sounds of these constructions, but they couldn't see them because that everything was going on above them. And they were very scared. Not only the children were scared, but also the parents were scared. They were worried about having to move home, leaving their own home and facing an unknown future, a future that they hadn't in many ways chosen. So we see these characters, the builders, the engineers on the scene. They are the people who are planning the city of future, the city of progress and welfare. But this city is also a huge shadow that darkens the city of these children. These children created these huge puppets on scene um, that were 5 meters high, and they projected these huge shadows. Then the story goes on. Um, there is a sort of a final clash, fight uh, between the silent kid and these builders, and the time starts to spin around when we go back to the present. But before we go back to the present, we see what happened to the child, to the silent child. We realize that the child was a ghost and he died because that day, when the mom was singing him a lullaby and giving him the books and he left for school, he did the same as the kids from the present. He flagged school. He took on a little boat he made himself and he entered a river, one of the local rivers, and a stream, and he died. He drowned. But when we go back to the present, the kids have the scarf from this child and they give back to their mother. And the opera ends with this choir, this song from all the singers on scene. So this is the story of our silent city.
Ok, so manca pochissimo al nostro tempo, quindi chiudo al
Okay, we are almost
giusto
done.
per
Our time is
diciamo
almost
che
over.
lavoriamo in teatro, abbiamo
I just want to
costruito
add that we did not have a theater to
discoteca
stage
e
this, but we
adesso
had
quello
to
che
build
faremo
this within
innanzitutto è
a former
presentare
disco. You can see a small
vedere
model
dietro anche le persone sorde e le persone
of
cieche.
this
Questo
new venue that we
Questi
built.
sono i
This
fantoni
was
di
accessible to deaf people as well. These are the puppets that I was telling you about, Alessandra was telling you about. These are the prototypes imagined by the children.
l'orchestra
And this is the
questa
orchestra
parte
that is performing.
di lavoro. Questo è una visualizzazione dei dati di come
And this is shows you
parliamo con delle persone
some
anziane,
data. I know you know about data,
che
but
non vedono a quanto
um,
sia
it's easier
importante
to see numbers,
questa
unfortunately, sometimes. So this, on the vertical axis, we see participation. So the better was the quality of the participation, the higher was the impact on the participants. For example, we can see that for all people, this was was an amazing experience. We created a libretto that you can see here, and the libretto of an opera is another way to discover the opera. You can come to Matera, you can listen to the opera and create more, even more, uh, when you are in the city. After this meeting, we can also send you some links if you're interested. So even if this opera will never be shown again, there is another way to discover the city through the tales of its citizens. And that's it. I'll pass you over to Rian. Thank you.